Hi, my favorite algebra students. Welcome back. We are on lesson 11. We're going to be talking about reciprocals and the multiplicative inverse of numbers, okay? We're also going to start in on that order of operations. I'm sure you guys all remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. If you're following along at home, I'm in the Algebra 1 Saxon book. It is the 3rd edition, and we are on page 51. Okay, so the first things first are the reciprocal or the multiplicative inverse. That's such a hard word to say. All that means is we take fractions and we flip them around. So the reciprocal of 3 over 4 is 4 over 3. The reciprocal of 6 over 7 would be 7 over 6, okay? Where it gets a little bit tricky is the reciprocal of 7. Well, remember, we can turn anything into a fraction by putting it over 1, right? So the reciprocal would be 1/7. That's all the multiplicative inverse is. If we have 1/3, the reciprocal would be 3 over 1, but we don't write that over 1 bit. We just write 3, okay? So that's all that is. The other thing that you need to know about the multiplicative inverse or the reciprocal is that when you multiply these things together, you get a special number. Take a look here. 3 times 4 is 12. 4 times 3 is 12. So we have 12 over 12, which if I recall correctly equals 1. 6 times 7 equals 42. 7 times 6 equals 42, which equals 1. 7 times 1 equals 7. 1 times 7 equals 7, which equals 1. I think you're catching on to this. When you multiply the number and its multiplicative inverse, or its reciprocal, you get 1 every time. Okay, that's how you know you've done it correctly. Okay, so now let's move on to order of operations. Order of operations. You may have heard this referred to as please, excuse, my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS. Now you'll notice a couple of things here. One is that I wrote the multiplication and division. I put them on the same line here. Actually, let's back up. Just for those of you who haven't heard of this, this stands for parentheses. This is our exponents, so parentheses, blah, blah, exponents, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. Can't think today. There we go. Subtraction, right? So the multiplication and division, you'll see I put them on the same line because we always do them from left to right. When we do our order of operations, we do multiplication and division. They're equal to each other. Same with addition and subtraction. Now, what I hate about this is that you've probably been told you have to do the order of operations. I'm here to tell you it's actually just a guideline. There are going to be a lot of times where you break the order of operation and you don't realize you're doing it. For the first example, or for the first reason why, is this thing where it says parentheses. That I really think should say grouping, because there are times where parentheses are implied. For example, if I have 7 plus 3 over 10, that is 7 plus 3 divided by 10, right? According to our order of operations, we need to do multiplication and division first, but I can't do that until I do this addition subtraction, right? I need to do that part first. This is called an implied grouping or parentheses, okay? Implied parentheses, implied grouping. So when I think about our order of operations, I often think, grouping should be in here. And instead of parentheses. The other thing that you'll see me do is right here in between parentheses and exponents, I am going to have you switch signs to add the opposite. Actually, it may come before multiplication and division. It may come after. You got to kind of juggle it to see what's going to be good. So let's get into that and to see some examples on how that would work. First things first, like I said, if you're following along at home, we're on page 52 now. Here's our first one. 4 plus 3 times 2. Okay, first things first, we're going to talk about chunks. I know there's a technical term for it. I think it's called terms. I don't like to talk about that. What I like to say are chunks. You're going to look at all of these guys, no matter how big the line is, and you're going to break them off into chunks. Chunks are broken up. Chunks, write this down, kids. Chunks are broken up by addition and subtraction. Oh, and equal signs. Subtraction and equal signs. So taking a look at this first example here, we actually only have 2 chunks. We've got this chunk right here, and then we have this chunk right here. The idea is you want to simplify all of your chunks within those chunks and then deal with adding and subtracting them all, okay? So in this case, we're going to simplify by doing this guy first. So we're gonna have 4 plus, and always bring down what you're working on. So I brought down 4 plus, and then this guy is 6, right? And 4 plus 6 is 10, okay? We'll get into some more complicated ones that make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, so looking at another example that we have here, simplify. So for example, 11.1, we have 4 times 3 plus 2 plus negative 3 times 5. Now here's why I hate parentheses. This parentheses here isn't saying, hey, you have to do this first. All that's saying is, it can be used a couple different ways. In this case, it's saying, hey, multiply those two things together. And sometimes you'll see parentheses like this, 10 plus negative 7. All that indicates, it's not saying, hey, do this first. It's saying, hey, that's a negative sign. I hate using parentheses to indicate a negative sign. Like, I think this is super wasteful. I'm lazy. I like to do things the easiest way. So I don't want to draw those 2 extra parentheses signs. That's too much work. Too much work. I can't be bothered. So I write it like this, but I'm very clear that my negative sign is up higher than my subtraction sign, okay? All right, so going back to this problem, let's look at our chunks. We got a chunk here, because remember, I'm broken up by addition and subtraction. We got a chunk here, we got a chunk here, okay? What we want to do is simplify all of those chunks before we go adding and subtracting. This first one, 4 times 3, gives us 12, plus 2, because we can't simplify anything in that chunk, plus, what's negative 3 times 5? Negative 15. You see how I have that negative nice and boosted up so it doesn't get confused for a subtraction sign? Good. Now at this step, what I advise is you add all your positives together. Again, I like to think of positives as like the positive team, and then our negatives are our negative team. So you group your teams together, and then you decide which team is larger and by how many. So I'm grouping my teams here, and I have 12 and 2, which gives us 14, plus negative 15. So I look at these guys and I'm like, all right, which team is larger? Looks like my negative one is. And by how many? By 1. So there's your answer. Okay, let's try some more examples here. For number 2, we have negative 5, parentheses 2, minus 3, plus 6, parentheses 3. Okay, again, I hate parentheses unless it's being used as like a grouping mechanism. So personally, I would rewrite this as negative 5 times 2, minus 3 plus 6 times 3. Okay, according to my rule, we've got how many groups here? We have this one, and this one, because they're broken up by addition and subtraction. We take a look at those groups and let's simplify within those groups. Negative 5 and 2 is negative 10, minus 3 plus 6 and 3, 18. Now that we've done this, when we get it, so I guess, yeah, in our PEMDAS order, right? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. At the beginning of the video, I said I put it right in here, but actually in between these two, I want you to add the opposite. Add the opposite. So we're going to do that here. For any subtraction sign, we add the opposite. And the opposite of positive 3 is negative 3. Okay. So we group now. Let's gather up all of our negatives. We got those guys right there. That means our team is negative 13. Their team is 13 large now, plus 18. Is our positive team, this guy over here. All right, so which team is larger? Our positive team. And by how many? 5. So our answer is positive 5. Okay? So let's try another one. For example, number 3, we have 4 times 3 minus 2 times 5 plus 6 minus 5 times 2. All right, we're going to find our groups, right? Our chunks. Here's a chunk. There's a chunk. Chunk, broken up by addition and subtraction. We have 4 chunks here. Let's simplify those chunks together. This is going to be 12. Bring down our sign. Minus 2 times 5 gives us 10. Plus 6 minus 5 times 2 is 10. Good. Now that we've done our multiplication and division, we are going to add the opposite. Add the opposite. So subtraction, we add the opposite of positive 10, negative 10. We add, and the opposite of positive 10 is negative 10. My dog is going to knock over my light. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I don't know how to do these technical things, but my dog doesn't like it when I give attention to somebody other than him. All right, back to our problem here. We want to gather up our teams. Here is our positive team. 6 and 12 gives us 18. Here is our negative team. 10 and 10 gives us negative 20. Which team is larger? This time it looks like our negative team is larger. By how many? 2. By 2. Good. Okay, so let's see about some of these other guys. All right, jumping right into, I'm sorry. This guy right here, 4 minus 3. This is 11C if you're following along. Minus 7 times negative 6. Minus 4 times negative 5. Okay, so for this first one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 chunks because they're broken up by addition, subtraction, right? So this first one, we're gonna do 4 minus. This one, 3 times 5 gives us 15. Bring down our, helps if you hold your pen. Bring down our sign. 7 times negative 6, because remember, I brought this sign down, so it's not negative 7 times negative 6. So 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. And again, do you see how I've separated out my subtraction versus my additions, or my negative sign? Now, bring down this sign, we get minus, and then we do this guy right here. 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. Okay, so now we have a bunch of negatives, or a bunch of subtractions here, so we have to add the opposite. We are going to add, and the opposite of positive 15 is negative 15. Terrible negative. We are going to add, and the opposite of negative 42 is positive 42. Add, and the opposite of negative 20 is positive 20. So what we have is 4 plus negative 15 plus 42 plus 20. We are going to add this plus this. That gives us 62 plus this is going to give us 66. All those, I added up all those positives, right? And I'm going to bring down that negative here. Okay, so we have 66 and 15. The positive team is larger, and by how many? Let's do some math over here. It is larger by 51. So our answer is going to be 51. So, okay, let's look at, all right, so let's move on to the practice. For those of you who are my students and you're following along at home, go ahead and pause the video now. On page 53, A through D are our practice problems. When you're ready, come on back and we'll do those. So 6 times 3 minus 4, 5, and 6. All right, we got 2 chunks here. We've got this chunk here, so we got to do those. First one, we get 18 minus 4 times 5 is 20 times 6. 20 times 6 would give us 120, right? Minus 120. Good. Let's add the opposite. Add, and the opposite of positive is negative. So we have 18 and negative 120. Which team is larger? Negative team. By how many? 102. 102 more players on that team. All right, let's look at B. We have 3 times 5 plus 2 plus 4 times negative 2. All right, how many chunks do we have here? We have 1, 2, and 3 chunks broken up by addition and subtraction. The first chunk we get 15 plus 2 plus 4 times negative 2 is going to be negative 8. Okay, let's add up our positive team here. We get 17. Our negative team here, we get negative 8. Which team is larger? Looks like our positive team is larger. By how many? 9. There are 9 more players on that team than the other team. All right, so let's look at C here. Two times 4 minus 3 times 2 minus 7 plus 5 times 2. All right, we got some chunks here. We got this chunk, and this chunk, and this chunk. So we got 4 chunks. First chunk, we get an 8 minus, because we bring down our sign, 6 minus 7 plus 10. All right, let's go through and add the opposite. All right, so let's gather up all our negatives here. This guy and this guy, that means we are going to be negative 13, okay? This, now we're gonna add up all our positives. That and that, we get 18 positives. Which team is larger? Looks like our positive team is larger, and by how many? 5. All right, so last one, letter D. 13 minus 4 times negative 5 minus 3 times 10. Oh, forgot a parenthesis there. All right, so we have 3 chunks here. 1, 2, and 3. We go ahead and bring 13 down, bring our minus sign. 4 times negative 5 is going to be negative 20. Again, look at my negative sign is very different from my subtraction sign. Minus 3 times 10, which will give us 30. Now we add the opposite, add the opposite, add the opposite. All right, let's gather up our teams. We have positive 13, positive 20. That gives us positive 33. Plus, here's our negative team, negative 30. Which team is larger? Looks like the positive team. And by how many? 3. Excellent work. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, good job.